Hello everybody, I'm Nick, and in this video I want to talk about whether .NET is still underrated in 2026 or if it is where it should be, and I'm going to give you my opinion on where I think it's heading, because that might surprise you. The elephant in the room I want to address straight away. I'm on a Mac now as my main workstation. The Windows PC is gone. It's just a backup now. And the reason for that is I just couldn't stand Windows anymore. The whole Microsoft situation with basically everything being broken. I had MacBooks for a very long time. I was always cross-platform. So now I'm on this. If you want to see a video on the transition and why I think this is just a far better system even for .NET developers, leave a comment down below and I will make that video. Now, on this topic, this Reddit post, again, many upvotes, says, I've been working with .NET recently and it feels way more powerful than the hype it gets. Between ASP.NET Core, minimal APIs, Blazor, solid performance improvements, the ecosystem feels mature, fast production already, cross-platform support. Obviously, as you can see, I can do everything I ever want to do with this, and iOS development as well, which I'm working on now as well. Linux, Docker, it has come a very, very long way. Yet there's many developers defaulting to Node or Python without even considering .NET. So for those using .NET in real projects, what are you building with it? Where do you think .NET shines the most? Any pain points still bother you? And curious to hear your thoughts. I'm going to tell you where I use .NET first, because I think there's a lot of context here. I build a lot of software, I ship a lot of software, I have tens of thousands of active users on my platforms. So I'm going to talk about that just for a second before I go into the comments and give you my opinion. You should know by now I run this platform called DomoTrain. We have a bunch of courses, video courses, as well as now we have a few hands-on things. In fact, we have a couple of hands-on practical courses. So for example, if you want to learn Postgres, you come in here and you start writing Postgres on the browser. And if you want to say, select star from whatever, that's all built, and the front end is built with JavaScript, CSS, and a framework called Eleventy. And we're using, I've built sort of an SSR framework on top of it with Cloudflare. So that's how the front end works, but everything on the back end is .NET APIs. So everything you see here, whenever a page is loaded, it's calling a .NET API. If you go on the leaderboard where you can see, all the lessons being completed basically in real time, you're going to see them popping up. This is using Signal R, for example, and a bunch of different technologies behind the scenes. So this software can handle many, many users in production very, very comfortably. And as someone who's also very comfortable with .NET, I know a lot about it. I can build .NET applications that are extremely performant, and I can make them extremely fast and safe and secure, because all of that is baked in. I cannot say the same for other frameworks I've used. Obviously, with all these vibe coding tools, Codex and Cloud Code, they are amazing in generating a lot of stuff with things like Python or Node and JavaScript and TypeScript, just because there's a lot of more code bases they can be trained on and produce those things. Like, for example, with Razor Pages, Claude and Codex is really bad with escaping the @ symbol in the syntax. So if you use the keyframe option on CSS inside the Razor page, it will basically always break unless you tell it, hey, this will break if you don't do it this way in the Claude MD or Agents MD, and you have to sort of babysit it. So in this sort of agentic coding era, I think people are even more likely to not use .NET because there is not enough, there's plenty, but there's not enough up-to-date, especially latest .NET training sets to build really, really good code. You can still do it, but because clearly that's where we're heading, right? We will not really be writing code by hand moving forward, and that's the sad truth, and it is truly sad, but it's extremely effective. I do think that .NET is underrated, but it's going to get even more underutilized because of the situation with the landscape. But let's see what the comments say. So feels underrated mostly in dev Twitter circles, not in actual enterprise where it's everywhere. That's true. .NET is everywhere in enterprise in the same way that Java is everywhere in enterprise. It's not the sexy fancy thing anymore, but it is everywhere. And it shines for boring money stuff like high throughput APIs, background jobs, gRPC. And that is true. Having tried other things, having tried building high throughput Python and JavaScript things, they can do it, but on the top end of the scale, .NET will serve you much better. gRPC, I haven't really seen many people use, to be honest, in production. I've only used it once 4 years ago, I think, at work. And even then, we probably moved away. I can't quite remember. But everything else, the entire story is legit. Now, why people default to Node and Python is vibes and the ecosystem inertia, plus more examples on Google for startups. So that is extremely true. And it's going to get even more true now with agentic coding and AI agents like Cloud Code and Codex. Cross-platform UI is still kind of messy. I mean, I'm using Rider, but to be honest, with how Rider is going in the past year and a half, I think I'm going to just go back to VS Code. I made a tweet a couple of days ago, I'm refusing to call it X, where I said that IDs are basically fundamentally changing and we're not going to have IDs the same way because these agentic coding tools will take a lot of that burden. So IDs will turn into pure debugging and code review tools, and at me in 2 years' time to see how this aged. Yes, .NET is still, people think, oh, Visual Studio, but with the C# dev kit, and yes, you do still have Rider, you can do fully cross-platform development. Like, I'm not using Visual Studio here, I'm not missing it. I wasn't using Visual Studio before since 2019, so I'm very comfortable, but there is literally nothing I'm missing on a Mac. Now, another comment coming from Python, JS, PHP, 6 to 7 years. The biggest shift is confidence, 100%. Coming from like dynamic languages like that, you would get that confidence. But that's a flaw in the language itself. It's not necessarily a benefit of .NET. It's a benefit of any strongly typed language. So you can say the same for JavaScript or C or C++ or any of those languages. I used to write code that was 85% sure it would behave as intended. I still don't understand how Python and JavaScript people do it. Yes, they have linters, yes, they have like a process to do it, but in my opinion, it's like every time I write JS, it's so scary, which is why I like TypeScript so much more. But .NET, it just gives you that confidence. Now, I wouldn't say that's what makes it underrated or overrated or good, it is just how the language is. So I would sort of disregard that comment. And I think this comment here, people still hate Microsoft with a passion and they'd never switch on principle. I think it's true, and they are definitely missing out. If you are not caught up with latest .NET, you're missing out. There's actually a video I want to react at some point by someone who tried to use .NET as a Linux developer, and it did not go great, but that's because you're using that preconceived notion that you have in your brain of how things should work, which if Microsoft wants to adopt that crowd, they should approach it from that perspective. It shouldn't be a Windows user that wants to use C# and .NET. It should be a Linux user that wants to use C# and .NET. So they have to work their way backwards. So generally, and obviously this is the .NET subreddit, so people would be pro.NET. If you go and ask that in JavaScript with the exact same question, they would give you a completely different answer. But Microsoft, especially with the Microslop thing that, you know, you have Copilot everywhere, like it has to be, like, honestly, that's one of the reasons why I moved away. There's 5 Copilot buttons everywhere. Why do I need Copilot on fucking Notepad? So now I'm on a Mac, turned Apple Intelligence off because that sucks, but it's pretty easy to turn it off, and life is good. Now, is .NET underrated? No, I think it's where it should be. I don't think that public opinion will change much from here going forward. What I think will happen is because of agentic tools, usage will fall down. However, what's going to happen, again, in my opinion, is because many big organizations are built in .NET and it's too expensive to migrate, the good .NET developers will be highly employable and very expensive to these companies that would not use agentic tools on the code base at all. So I think the market will shrink, but that smaller pie will get way more high value. I guess we'll see in a couple of years, but that's where I stand. But I really want to know from you, what do you think about this, and where do you stand in this underrated, overrated, cross-platform, like, is it where it should be? Leave a comment down below and let me know. Well, that's all I had for you for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, keep coding.